Smart Silver Stacker live stream. I don't know what to call this. The live stream, the Smart Silver Stacker show. I'm not sure, but we got a lot to talk about in today's live stream, in today's episode, because we appear to be headed towards an economic collapse in this country. And there are a number of factors that are contributing to that. We're going to talk about some of those in today's video and some of the ways that you can get prepared. Now, if you've been watching the mainstream, you might not even realize that we are facing this specter of an economic collapse. Now, certainly, plenty of attention has been paid lately to the debt ceiling crisis, and we are going to get into that a bit today. But also, I mean, really, if you look at the media, the mainstream, what they're covering right now, it seems like everybody is completely obsessed with, Bud Light, the beer company, Anheuser-Busch, and this individual that they've put on their beer bottle, and that person's, biological gender versus their gender identity. And, to me, maybe I have an opinion on this, maybe I don't. I'm not going to even share it with you today, though, because you know what they say about opinions. I mean, everybody has one, kind of like something else that everybody has. And, you're probably not too interested in that. The whole reason I bring that story up in the first place, though, is because, I mean, it's so absurd that that is what everybody is focused on, especially when you consider the backdrop against which that story is receiving all of this coverage. We've got the dollar potentially on its last legs. We have got inflation. We are on the verge of World War III. I mean, some might even say we are already engaged in World War III, and it's just a matter of time before that becomes official. Certainly, there is a proxy war going on, and there's a lot of geopolitical tension with Russia and China and the West that is brewing, and all of this could potentially contribute to this economic collapse that I am referring to today. We're going to get into why. The first thing I want to cover is the US debt and the potential for a debt default. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a while, I think they're going to raise the debt ceiling. I think that they will raise the debt limit. I don't think that they're going to let all of these catastrophic consequences that the powers that be are warning about come to fruition. But every day that goes by that they don't raise the debt ceiling, we do get a little bit closer to that possibly happening. I mean, the warnings that we've heard from Janet Yellen surrounding the possibility of a debt crisis, I don't think are that overblown. I mean, she's told us that markets could collapse. We could see a lack of services, including law enforcement. I mean, essentially, she's telling us that we could be headed towards, the lack of rule of law in this country if we don't manage to raise the debt ceiling. And, I think that that's one thing that we potentially could agree on, myself and Janet Yellen. There will be dire consequences if they don't raise the debt ceiling. But the thing that they won't tell you about the debt ceiling is that, I mean, even if they do raise it, there's going to be huge economic problems, and they're just going to be kicking the can down the road. Now, I see a lot of people chiming in on the chat saying the story about Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch and, gender and all this stuff, psyops. Yeah, probably. I mean, it's, divide and conquer. It's a very old play from the powers that be playbook, divide and conquer, and that's exactly what we are seeing happen in the West, and specifically here in the US. You got the red hat crew versus the blue hairs, and that's the dynamic that everybody is focused on, and nobody is paying attention to the fact that the US economy is headed for probably the worst recession or depression in living memory, and it's very likely that the dollar, when all is said and done, may lose its world reserve status. And when that happens, a lot of assets are going to suffer. Janet Yellen tells us we could see huge sell-offs in the stock market. Real estate could collapse. Interest rates could spike up. But I will tell you, one asset that will not suffer if we see a debt default is physical precious metals, both gold and silver. I assure you, now, of course, not financial advice. I don't really provide assurances. But if I were a betting man, I would say that if we see a debt collapse, the price of physical metal is going to benefit from that. Let's just leave it at that. There will be a huge flight into the safety that precious metals provide, whether it be silver or gold or platinum. Pick your metal. Any physical, tangible, hard asset is going to become pretty much impossible to obtain, I believe, if we do see a U.S. debt collapse. And if you are a debt default, rather. Hey, everybody in the chat there. I see a constitutional stacker chiming in. Thank you very much, everybody who's popping in now. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do smash that like button. And, speaking of hard assets, if we do see a debt default, I do think that they will be one thing that will benefit, perhaps the only uh, asset that will benefit in that event. If you're looking to get your hands on some gold and silver, today's video sponsor is SD Bullion. They have got this sale going on right now. Not really a sale, just an exclusive product. They sent out an email about this a couple hours ago. This 2023 1 ounce Ram of Calvary silver coin. It is a legal tender coin from, now I had to look this up, Niue, I think is the name of the country. It's a small Pacific island nation. But anyway, cool coin, and it's an SD Bullion exclusive. So anytime you can get your hands on anything exclusive and of limited mintage at a pretty decent premium there, not a bad idea. So if you're looking to stack to get ready for this incoming economic collapse, then that is something you might want to consider. You can check out SD Bullion with the link down in the description. And I talk a lot about gold and silver and how those are assets that will benefit, from the economic crisis which is playing out. But some of the other things you need to have too, if we do get, lack of law and order, you need to be stacking some food too. And I've got this big Mountain House can here. I can't quite get it into frame, but don't just stack gold and silver, because remember, you can't eat that stuff. And I do think that as far as preserving wealth over the long term, gold and silver are probably our best bets. Food will also be a critical resource. And Mountain House, I don't know if you've ever had it before. It's pretty tasty. It's kind of pricey, I suppose. Doesn't make up the bulk of my food preps, but it is nice to have, and you can always snack on it a little bit during good times as well. And the price of food is only going up. So even though Mountain House not super cheap, I'm sure it'll be more expensive in dollar terms a year or 2 years or 3 years out from now. And the Mountain House number 10 cans supposedly, I think, a 25-year shelf life. Probably better if you store them properly. Don't take my word on that. But anyway, yeah, don't forget CBRN protection, night vision, and thermal, Fastcar says. Well, I don't have any night vision or thermal, although I suppose those might be good things to have. But yeah, probably not a bad idea to have a couple of ventilator masks. I mean, look at what happened to those people in, what was it, East Palestine, Ohio? They got surrounded suddenly by a giant toxic cloud of smoke because of the brilliant decision to light those train cars on fire. And, train derailments, pretty common thing these days with our crumbling infrastructure here in the U.S. And, CBRN, probably not a bad idea. Get some masks at least. There's a lot of things which might come in a lot of handy should we get an economic collapse and the lack of rule of law. You might want to have some power backup, some food, some security devices, whatever that happens to be in your jurisdiction, something to protect yourself. I would advocate for those big time. Could become very essential. I mean, think about this. Think about, we're talking about food. If the debt default occurs, we might see SNAP benefits being withdrawn. I mean, there are millions of Americans who depend on SNAP benefits, checks from the government, to buy food. Now, I don't begrudge those people what they're doing. I mean, if the government's offering you free food, you might as well take it. I mean, I blame the electorate and the government itself for instituting those programs. But if all of a sudden those folks don't get those checks and they get hungry, well, things can get pretty ugly. I mean, we saw just a couple years ago, things got pretty ugly in terms of inside of certain cities, rioting, looting, civil disorder in general. And, we're in this society where everybody's broke now. That is one thing I kind of want to talk about today, how the average American is now just struggling so much. And, when people start being unable to afford the basic necessities of life, you really have to be concerned about that, right? People, can be pretty docile, but when they can't get food, they can't get the things that their family needs, that's a big problem. Hey, 365 days of silver, 4.99 in, I think that's British pounds. So that works out well here. Thank you for that super chat. I appreciate that tremendously. Speaking of the American consumer, this is the Q1 2023 report from the New York Federal Reserve, the Center for Microeconomic Data, surrounding household debt and credit. Thank you, Constitutional Stacker, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate the support, everybody. Everybody who tunes into these and chats and participates and does the super chats, you are awesome. Best stacker audience on YouTube. If you ask me, I am tremendously appreciative of everybody who tunes into these. Now, I'm sorry, I got this autofocus thing. Probably going to get a new phone soon for these live streams because I think it would make the quality a bit better. But this report shows that now we've got $17.05 trillion in household debt in the United States. This is a new all-time record high. Now, credit card debt is just under $1 trillion at 986 billion. We've also got a ton of mortgage debt on the rise. I mean, the point is here, uh, you know, consumers are barely keeping up with living expenses. They're going into debt to try to keep up with the forces of inflation. And, this is not sustainable. You cannot go into debt endlessly, although, I mean, that memo doesn't seem to have gotten through to the government because they continue to do that. They're just paying off, yesterday's bills by borrowing more money. And that's one of the things about this debt ceiling, which I think, they don't really tell us. I mean, the story from the mainstream seems to be that in order to avoid an economic collapse, we have to borrow more money, right? We have to borrow more money. We have to raise the debt ceiling. We have to borrow more money, or all of these catastrophic events are going to play out. Well, I have news for you. They're going to play out regardless of whether they raise the debt ceiling or not. Just the situation that we find ourselves in where the debt ceiling has to be raised in order to pay our bills. They keep talking about how the US pays its bills. No, we don't. We borrow more and more money and we keep going more into debt. I mean, the US national debt is going to hit $32 trillion very soon. The real deficit is probably closer to about $2 trillion annually. And interest rates continue to move up. The debt service, that is the interest cost of the national debt, continues to grow. And this threatens to spiral into a massive inflationary debt crisis, even if we do raise the debt ceiling. I mean, in fact, it's kind of one way or the other. It's like all that we're doing by kicking the can down the road and raising the debt ceiling is we are opting for one form of default over the other, because you can't pay off $32 trillion, and that's just the national debt, let alone the $187 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Don't forget that. We've got that right there, $187 trillion in unfunded liabilities. And I have news for you. There's no way to pay for that through taxation. I mean, you could slash all of the government programs in existence if you somehow had a political means to do that, and still the existing debt, I don't think you'd be able to pay it off. I mean, what does that come out to when you divide $187 trillion by the number of taxpayers? It's an astronomical number. I'm not going to do it on the calculator right now, but it's a lot less, or it's a lot more than any taxpayer has the money to pay. I mean, even, they talk about taxing the rich. Well, guess what? The rich, one thing, if you start doing these confiscatory wealth taxes, I mean, they're going to leave, so you can't tax them anymore. And also, there's not that many rich. I mean, yes, there's a lot of millionaires out there, but they, can't afford to pay $500,000 or $1 million in taxes to take care of this. Constitutional Stacker is out. See you, man. Thank you for the support. Appreciate you hopping in here today. I'll catch some of your videos later, I am sure. But so the debt is going to be a crisis whether they raise the debt ceiling or not. That is the takeaway here. And raising the debt ceiling does nothing more than just kick the can down the road a little bit longer, which is good. I mean, I guess as stackers, we should hope that they raise the debt ceiling because it'll give us that much longer to prepare. But the flip side of that is the longer they continue to kick this can down the road, the worse the ultimate pain will be. Because as bad as a U.S. debt default at this point would be, continuing to finance all of this spending via borrowing and creating a massive, hyperinflationary currency crisis is going to be that much worse. But that's where we're headed. And so that's why you got to get your precious metals, you got to get your food, you got to get your security, you got to get ready for this. Because, it used to be when I started stacking, it was kind of like, okay, we got this $10 trillion in debt, $11 trillion. They're spending a lot of money. This is not good. But now, I mean, things are really reaching ahead, and it's not just the debt. I mean, there's some other stories I want to get into today because, even if somehow they magically resolve this debt problem, and I don't think they're going to, I think they're just going to raise the ceiling. I mean, personally, that if I had to bet money on it, I think that's what's going to happen. But even if they do that, we have got a lot of other things brewing. We just had the G7 wrap up their meeting in Hiroshima in Japan, or Hiroshima. I'm not sure how to pronounce that one way or the other. The G7 wrapped up their meeting there, and they issued a strong condemnation of China as it intensifies the response to Beijing. This is a headline from the FT here. And I mean, the gist of this meeting, they didn't really talk about the debt crisis or the collapsing banks or the double digit inflation in much of the Eurozone or Japan's economic malaise. No, what they talked about primarily was this war in Ukraine and China, because at this point, China and Russia are basically operating as a unit, as a geopolitical unit. I mean, they may have their differences, but the G7 in the West is overtly hostile to both of these countries. And the G7 made no bones about it. The British condemned them. The British also at this G7 meeting pledged to train more Ukrainian pilots. We had Zelensky himself making a surprise appearance at the G7 meeting. So, they're trying to put pressure on China to sort of put pressure on Russia. They want China to urge Russia to withdraw their troops from Ukraine. And this war in Ukraine, I mean, it's not getting any better. The Russian forces seem to have just taken the critical city of Bakhmut. It's a lot of conflicting information there. I think Zelensky denies that, but it does look like the Russians are going to be victorious there ultimately, at least from what I have read. And so, that war is not getting any better. It is continuing to descend into an increasingly hostile conflict. I mean, they're already massacring thousands of each other on both sides. So I don't know if you can get more hostile, but more players could get drawn in, and we have got NATO essentially at war with Russia now, and that is what the G7 was focusing on. And it makes sense, when you got a global war, that is what you focus on, I guess, despite the fact that the economy domestically is falling apart. Now, another thing I wanted to point out here, this is a chart from the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. They've got this chart. This is from an article a couple years ago about the G7, but I thought this chart was good. It shows the percentage of the G7's GDP as a percentage of global GDP. Sorry if I didn't explain that exactly perfectly there, but essentially the G7 share of global GDP is on the decline. And you can see this chart goes back to about 1970 when they had about 64% of global GDP. And today it's just over 40%. So the G7 is losing market share in the global economy. They're losing influence. And I don't think they like this very much. And so we have this sort of Western hegemon pursuing economic warfare against China and Russia. And, I don't know if you've been to the store lately. You go to a Walmart or a Target or whatever, big box store you have near you, but a lot of the stuff that you buy there is made in China. And if we get into a deeper conflict with them over Taiwan, the South China Sea, that was a big part of what the G7 was condemning them for, was militarizing the South China Sea, then those stores are going to be empty. And I mean, it's just going to make what we've experienced over the past couple of years. I mean, you can remember in 2020, shelves were a bit bare. We've had supply chain crises over the past several years. That has been putting pressure on prices upward, the supply chain problems. And then also, we got all this money printing leading to higher prices and inflation. We had bare shelves. That's all going to look like child's play compared to what will happen if we get into a conflict with China, an open conflict. Those stores are going to be empty, and the price of a lot of goods is going to shoot up just because the supply is going to decline. A lot of these inexpensive manufactured goods that we kind of take for granted, they all get made in China, and they will disappear. Beijing rebuking, Japan, Britain, and the G7 over what they're calling an anti-China G7 summit. So China is not taking this lying down. I mean, they have described this G7 meeting as an anti-China workshop, and they have summoned their diplomat from Japan to kind of dress them down, I guess. But the point here is that the U.S.-China relations are not getting any better here. And in fact, it's almost like the U.S. at this G7 meeting is trying to stir up anti-China sentiment, and the Chinese are upset about that. Understandably. I mean, if you have a large global meeting that gets a ton of attention, and they are issuing these, uh, condemnations of your nation, in this case China, certainly that is just representative of the deepening tensions that we are experiencing. And in terms of this global conflict, another story I wanted to point out that just emphasizes how bad things are getting and how it really is not even a proxy war at this point, but really a direct warfare between, you can say the US and Russia or NATO and Russia, however you want to describe it. We had last week this Patriot missile system in Ukraine. So the US is providing Patriot missile systems, and it was reported as destroyed by the Russians. Now, the Ukrainians and the US coming out and saying, no, it was just damaged. But this is a $1 billion state of the art missile defense system, the Patriot missile batteries that the US is providing over there. The most recent report I've seen is that the Pentagon says that this system is repaired and it's back online. But, before this incident, supposedly the Patriot missile was, impossible to damage. Now, I think, there's probably no weapon system or defensive system out there in the world that is impossible to circumvent or overcome one way or another. And if there is, it's only a matter of time before some counter, is developed for that. But the fact that we have billions of dollars of U.S. military equipment operating in Ukraine and now coming into direct conflict with the Russians. I mean, this is only a matter of time until something, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not an expert on geopolitics in Eastern Europe, but excuse me if I've got the sniffles here a little bit. I think I'm coming down with a little cold or something today. So bear with me on that. But, this is not a conflict that is going away anytime soon. And it's much more likely that over the next year or years, this is going to continue to get worse, and it could happen very quickly. Warboss says, LOL, no way, it's fixed. There is a picture of it completely blown up. Yeah, very conflicting reports over what's going on in there. I mean, in a war, there's a lot of fog of war. You can't really trust anything that either side is saying because everything is calculated just to, meet some kind of geopolitical or strategic objective and to give them the advantage. So it's not like I blame them for lying or obfuscating the truth on either side there. They're just playing the game. But as, kind of bystanders and folks who are just, witnessing this, experiencing it, well, we have to try to decode what's going on the best we can. Getting back to domestic issues here, let me go to the chat here real quick. Super Based God ZZ says, should I buy gold today? Well, I don't give advice on this channel. If we go back to SD Bullion, we can get the latest price for gold. It looks like it is about $1,983 right now, so it seems like a good time to stack to me. It doesn't mean that you need to go out and stack, do your own due diligence. Everybody's situation is different. And, I can't really tell you whether you should go buy gold, but I do think that now in general is a good time to be buying gold since we've seen this pullback below $2,000. Although, of course, you can't get any physical metal, like the real kind that you can hold in your hand for under $2,000, but you might be able to get close. I think SD Bullion right now, they have the 1/10 ounce Britannias on sale. Oh, they've got a couple of new sales, actually. They've got this South African gold elephant coin. Pretty good price right now. So anyway, yeah, and there's other places you can go out there too. Maybe you want to get some gold backs if you don't want to make a big purchase, but you want to stack some small denomination gold. You can get some gold backs and a cool gold back wallet like this. Excellent fractional gold. If we really do get an economic collapse and civil unrest, something like a gold back might really come in handy. I know it sounds very far-fetched, I know, to say, oh, you're going to be trading, in this kind of like Mad Max SHTF scenario with goldbacks. But listen, SHTF doesn't necessarily mean Mad Max. I mean, there have been plenty of places over the past century that have experienced massive inflation or hyperinflation. I mean, you got Hungary, you got Zimbabwe, you got the Weimar Republic, you got Venezuela more recently. The list goes on. I mean, hyperinflation is not an unusual thing in the world. And, if we do see an inflation in the dollar, then I do think that gold probably will be the fallback, gold and silver as well, because they are real stores of value. You can't print them. And as soon as confidence is lost in a paper currency, things can happen pretty quick. In Venezuela, I have a little personal experience with that. Somebody says goldbacks. Are you serious? Yeah, man, goldbacks are. I like goldbacks. I know they are probably the most polarizing bullion item, which is always kind of amusing to me. I mean, the reaction. It's like I don't have all my gold in goldbacks, but I like them. I think they're cool. Why do you buy goldbacks at almost 100% premium? Well, let's talk about that real quick. I'm going to do a video later this week on fractional gold, but we can talk a little bit about premiums right now. I think right now, if you get a U.S. Gold Eagle, so that's 1/10 of an ounce. This is a 1/10 ounce Gold Eagle. You're going to be paying about 280 bucks, $270 for this. That's a huge markup over the spot price, right? That's a massive markup. And then you get a gold back, a one gold back note like this. This has got 1/1000th of an ounce of gold. So it makes sense that the premium on this would be a little higher than on a coin. And this is really the right amount of metal for day-to-day transactions. Now, in the past, throughout much of modern history and even back into the medieval era, silver, for that reason, silver was the primary currency because it's kind of just right. It's in that Goldilocks zone of talked about this in a video recently. It's not too heavy, it's not too light. Copper is kind of heavy to be using for day-to-day transactions because you need a lot of it to have value. And then gold, this little gold bar right here, 10 grams. I don't know what the value of that is right off the top of my head, but it's a lot more than I'm going to be spending at the grocery store or whatever. So, that's too big. So silver has always been good, but goldbacks I think has really solved that problem. I'd rather have silver than goldbacks. Black Silverstaff says, well, yeah, I've got a lot more silver than I do goldbacks, but I do like the goldbacks. I think they're cool. I mean, in terms of price performance, they've done quite well over the past several years. You can't argue with that, right? If you look at a chart, goldback premiums are outrageous. Well, yeah, I mean, they're high, but the thing is that if you sell them, you get that premium right back. And, there is a cost to making bullion items. One of the reasons that small items like even a 1 ounce bar, let's use this for an example, or a 1 ounce round. 1 ounce round is typically going to have a higher premium on it than, say, a 20 ounce bar. Now, I know there's always exceptions to that, but just all other things being the same, say a generic bar, a generic round, the 1 ounce round is going to cost more per ounce. And the reason is because there's kind of a fixed cost in terms of creating these bullion items, right? So you figure if you've got a 1 ounce gold coin, you make one of these. You pay that cost once, right? Whereas a gold back, this coin has enough gold in it to make 1,000 gold backs. So you've got to pop out 1,000 of those things. So there's a cost associated with that, but they have a utility. Check out my interview with Jeremy Corden, the CEO of Goldback Inc. He does a better job of explaining it than I do. I like them. They're not for everybody, I guess. They're very polarizing. The goldbacks always get a strong reaction one way or the other. You kind of love them or hate them. I like them. I'm not enamored of them, but I do think that they are a good thing to have in your stack. You can get them for a couple bucks. So if you just want to put a few dollars into gold, I think they're a good vehicle for that. But that's just me. If you prefer silver, then by all means get silver. Look, I'm not trying to tell anybody what to stack. That's not what this channel is all about. I am just telling you what I am doing. I consider that to be, my purpose here is to share with you my strategy and what I'm doing. I'm not telling anybody what to do. Maybe goldbacks aren't right for you. Don't buy goldbacks then. But I will tell you, if you're in fiat currency and you're not in physical metal, then you might want to reconsider your strategy. But hey, listen, if you want to get silver rounds as opposed to goldbacks, then I think that that's probably just fine. I think that they'll both, serve the purpose of long-term wealth preservation and also potentially serving as a means of trade absent the dollar, or in the environment in which the dollar has been severely devalued. I do want to, okay, getting back to domestic stuff, I do just want to talk a little bit about this story. This was something that came out on Friday, I believe on May 19th. Federal Reserve Chair Powell hints at a pause in rate hikes when central banks meet next month. So Powell has indicated that the stress in the banking sector and the kind of economic downturn we're experiencing as a result of that may be sufficient to contract credit enough to bring inflation down. And so he's talking about now potentially pausing rate hikes for the first time since the Fed began their series of hikes. And markets are kind of pricing that in now. Well, this is interesting. Doing these live streams in real time is cool because kind of get to see things as they play out. This is the CME FedWatch tool. Now, earlier today, I think that the chance of a pause was closer to 75%. Looks like it's coming down now. Maybe we had some hawkish jawboning from the Fed. Now it's at 68.6, but markets are still pricing in a pause at the next FOMC. And this has actually lent a little bit of support to the gold and silver price. We haven't gotten back over 2000 in gold, but it did sort of arrest their downturn when Powell said this. And the pullback that we saw last week in gold and silver, there were several catalysts for it, but one of them was that there were some Fed members, some Fed, I don't know who the exact bankers were, I don't recall off the top of my head, but there were several of these, Fed officials who were kind of hawkish, jawboning the market, and we saw the price of the metals begin to decline, but then we get Powell coming out and kind of clarifying what they said, saying, we might pause. And now listen, what the Fed is going to do next, who knows, right? I mean, maybe they're going to pause. I think that they're going to begin easing eventually. If we do see an economic crisis, I think that what we'll see is that the Fed will slash interest rates and return to QE. I mean, that's my forecast for what ultimately in the kind of medium term is going to happen. But calling what the Fed is going to do at the next meeting or two meetings, it's not that big of a deal, really, because they are just bankers, they're just people. But the thing that really all of this jawboning and the market reactions to it tells us, it's indicative of that, something we've known for a while, that these markets are not driven by market fundamentals. There's no real price setting mechanism at work here. It's all being driven by what the Fed is telling us is coming down next. Everything in these markets responds immediately to the words coming out of central bankers' mouths, but they don't respond to the real situation on the ground. And to us, I view that as really a positive thing for stackers, because it means that we are able to get still gold and silver at these just very, very low valuations. And when the markets realize that the Fed is not really in control, I think that the price of the metals is going to be going much higher. Now, what's it going to take for that to happen? I don't know. I mean, maybe if we get a debt default and then some kind of insane response to that on the part of the Fed, then maybe that'll do it. Or if the Fed pivots, but I do think that that is on its way. Scottsdale Stacker says, I have toilet paper, lots of it. Yes, good. Stack your toilet paper, stack your food, stack all the essentials, folks, because the economy is not improving, and we are on the verge of World War III. We've got a looming debt crisis here in the US, and everybody is obsessed with these bread and circuses. This Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch thing. This is all just indicative of an empire in its terminal phase, an empire that is heading into decline. And that's where we find ourselves. So it is absolutely time to be stacking and getting prepared, because, look, whether it be a debt default or more debt, either way, the situation's not looking good. And whether it be a war in Eastern Europe or economic warfare and sanctions on China, the availability of basic stuff, may come under some serious threat. And according to the powers that be, I'm not making this stuff up, according to Yellen, we may see a lack of rule of law, law enforcement disbanding, not responding, crashing markets. So in this kind of a scenario, and with all these challenges facing us, I think that we just need to be doing our best to get prepared, do a little bit every day, whether it be getting an extra couple of cans of food at the grocery store, getting some rice and some beans, getting some Mountain House food, doing some training. Don't neglect your physical fitness and your health, because that stuff could be extremely important. And, just get ready to deal with scenarios that you probably didn't see coming, because who knows how this could end up playing out, but it's not looking good, and I don't think that we're going to get a return to normal. That whole phrase, the return to normal, seems to be out of people's vernacular now. For a while there, during the pandemic and all that, everybody would say, when are we going to get back to normal? But now I think it's dawning on people that we're not going back to normal, folks. It's just going to get weirder from here on out. And that's typically what happens when you have a declining empire. Things don't just kind of dip into decline and then into a new golden age. No, we've got an empire on decline. We're watching history unfold before our eyes. We're living through history, and we need to do what we can to get as prepared as possible. So I'll leave you with that today. I do appreciate everybody who tuned in to this live stream. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do like that. If you're watching this later on, give the video a big thumbs up. Don't forget to check out the other videos on this channel. Stay tuned for later this week. I'll be doing a video on fractional gold and some of the better deals there, and what to look for when you're buying small gold products. And with that being said, thank you all very much for tuning in. I will catch you next time. Stay safe and happy stacking, everybody. Get prepared. Smart Silver Stacker out.